Okay, so what I'm doing here today is kind of, well, before 3D printing, I used to do a lot of casting of toy parts. And I still think this is the better way to do things than 3D printing. But 3D printing is so common and cheap that everyone just 3D prints now. But what I have is, these are the wing actuators for 1995 to 2000, probably 2004, Buzz Lightyear action figure that was my son's. These are good ones. My grandson really likes Buzz Lightyear, but I didn't want him to take home and maybe lose my son's Buzz Lightyear, because I still have his original Buzz Lightyear and it still works fine. So I picked him up a Buzz Lightyear, and I fixed the electronics on it, but the wings weren't folding out. And these, the long flat part there, well, the red thing I glued on there, that's a piece of a straw, and I'll explain that in a second. The long flat white part is what actually, there's a spring in there, and these two pieces will unfold, kind of like scissors, and they'll put the wings out. Well, they're broke off right about here, so they don't activate the wings anymore. So I'm gonna make some new ones. To do that, before 3D printing, you would use a chemical. I usually use smooth-on products, and since I'm not too far from Dick Blick's, what they had in stock at 20% off was this garbage. Don't buy this, but it's Umu 30. And sorry, my workbench is an atrocious mess. I normally buy this stuff, which is like, I think it's called Mold Max 27T. And when the mold is new, it's a little bit more translucent than that. You'd be able to see through it. You'd be able to see the parts. You pour the resin in here, and then you just open it up and take out your parts. This stuff is a 2-part mix. I think it said it's a platinum cure, but it might be tin cure. Oh, it's tin cure. And that's important because it depends on what types of resins you can use with it. So it's a tin cure, but there's also a platinum cure. And so what I'll do is, these are mixed 1-to-1 by weight or by volume. And so you have to really mix them. They came in like a block. So I mixed them up really good. And this is what you get. And it's a mess, and I wouldn't mess with it because the Mold Max works so much better. It comes in a large jar. This is what I use right here. Here it is, right here. This is what I would normally use. Mold Max 27T. You get a big jar like that, and then you get a tin with a chemical like water in it. And then you mix it like 10-to-1. I think by weight. I'm positive it's by weight. So it's like 10 grams of rubber for 1 gram of liquid. You mix it together, super easy. Put it in the mold overnight, pressurized, and the next day it's good to go. But this stuff's supposed to be good after about 6 hours. So what we're gonna do is I'll show you how to make a mold. Normally I'll use something like this. When you're old, you get a bunch of pills, and I'm old, so I get a bunch of pills. So I cut the end off because it's easier. And then in the cap, I put some clay. And what I'll do is I'll make a little mountain in here, and I'll put a line on it so I know where the flat sides are. And I'll show you that in a second. And once that's fully cured, so I put a little 5-minute epoxy holding the straw in there. And once that's fully cured, I'll set them in here. Then I'll put this on. And then I'll mix this crap up. Pour it in there. And then I'll put it in one of my modified paint pots, which is just a Harbor Freight $90 paint pot. Put it up to 60 pounds for the night. And then tomorrow, I should be able to make some new Buzz Lightyear wings for my grandson. And his Buzz Lightyear should be fully functional. He could take it home and bury it in the garden if he wants to. And this is what I use. This is the kind of clay. This is modeling clay. You can't use like regular clay because it might have moisture in it or other impurities that'll affect your mold or cause your rubber not to cure properly. But this stuff, this modeling clay, works just fine. And that's what that is. And you can reuse it a million times. It's a little tough until you start kneading it or if you get it warm. But just give me a second and I'll get this mounted up and show you what I'm going to do. Okay, so hopefully this is going to make sense. So this is going to be the base. And there's a scribe line right here. And that's because this is opaque. And so that way I'll know where to start cutting. When I take the clay off, the clay will be the top of the mold. And this will be the bottom of the mold. And the clay will be the top. So once I take the clay out, I'll see the straws. I'll take the straws out, but I won't really know where to cut. So with the scribe line, that'll guide me to this edge. And I'll use my X-Acto knife to cut along that edge. Free this first one, and since I put them parallel to each other, I'll just follow the scribe line across and be able to cut out both of these. This half will be the back half of the mold, so that I won't cut it all the way through. I'll only cut it to where I can get this piece out and across the top, just until I get this piece out. So this will hold it, the mold, kind of in the right shape. And then when I want to make copies, you'll see I'll just put a little bit of tape on the mold, electrical tape, to kind of hold things together, and then I'll be able to fill it with resin and make copies. But we'll get there in a minute. We're getting ahead of ourselves. For now, you just need to see the scribe line. And then I built that little ramp there. That's going to act as a reservoir of resin. So when we're pouring the molds, there'll be resin in there because I pour them and I vacuum cast them, which means that it'll suck all the air out. But if there's not enough resin to go in when I'm sucking the air out, obviously it won't fill the mold full. So I'll just put this on and then I'll start mixing up my chemical. But you see this is how it's going to look. I'll start mixing my chemical and I'll show you the next step. Okay, so I'm getting ready to pour this now. I got my chemical mixed up, and the pink and the blue make purple. That's full of air, but that's what we're going to pressure cast it for. That'll destroy all the air that's in there. Before anybody complains, see, I do have a nice 3D printer. And notice it's still in the box, because even though I paid $500 for that thing, you still have to pay another couple $100 for a wash station and a UV station. I didn't know any of that crap when I bought it. I don't know crap about that. But I do know a lot about resin and pouring and stuff like that. So this is way cheaper and it does a better job anyways. So we're going to try to pour this on the side and kind of, if you pour it slow, it'll break some of those air bubbles out of there. Let's see if we can do this. I might just cut because I got to be careful, but we'll see. Hopefully I poured enough. Hopefully I made enough. I might have to mix up some more. It only has like a 30-minute pot life, so you kind of got to go fast, and I just kind of guessed at how much I would need. But it looks like I may need more than what I thought. This stuff is like thick too. I don't really like it that much. Like I said, the Mold Max works way better. This stuff would be okay for what I was going to use it for, was for making some Dwarven Forge stuff and fixing my Cobra Terradrome. I have some broken pieces that I need to glue back together and cast. Ah, crap, see, it's pushing my stuff over. That's what you don't want. You don't want them to get out of parallel. Okay, I'm going to have to cut while I make sure it gets some on the other side. Okay, so it's about 9 hours later, and I just opened it up out of the mold, and you can see there's a scribe line. It starts right there, and then it runs across to the other one. So what that means is I'll once I take it out of the pillbox, I'll cut it across here and across to that one, and then I'll leave from here to there intact. And that'll give me the about half an inch all the way down, and the same way on the bottom it'll be split from about here to here. So it'll leave me that half inch to let everything line back up. And then you could use the pillbox, I suppose, and just put the mold back in the pillbox and run tape across here so that the tape can't get too tight. and squeeze the mold too hard, because that'll deform the contents of the mold. But usually I'll just use tape, just like you see here, just loosely taped, and then that'll allow me to fill the mold and keep the mold. And here's a cylindrical one. I don't remember what this is. I think it's a head for a Rambo action figure that I was making, but it'll be the same thing. And then this stuff is, like I said, it seems like it is okay. If I compare it to the Mold Max, yeah, it's definitely softer than the Mold Max, so it's definitely not going to hold up. Out of the Mold Max stuff, I'll usually get 20 or more pores out of one mold. This stuff, I'd be surprised if you got 10 good ones out of there. But it might be okay if you're making jewelry, or you have some open-sided mold. An open-sided mold would be similar to this, where you're just putting something in here and then popping it back out. And I imagine eventually this soft crap will eventually start tearing out. And you do use ease release with it to make it easier to get your stuff out. But any detail in the items that you're casting are gonna kind of pull on the mold when you're taking them out, and this soft stuff will just tear away. Luckily, I don't need to make a whole bunch of Buzz Lightyear wings, so I'll open it up and then I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, so I've got the original parts removed from the mold, and usually the reason I reuse epoxy is just because it just pops off and it doesn't leave any marks or anything on the original piece. Now, I have in the past just used a small drill bit that's the same size as the straw, and like when I was making dice and stuff, and I didn't really care about the originals, and I'll just drill a hole in there and then stick the straw in, and then they stay in the mold better, because sometimes the epoxy don't like to stick to stuff. But in this case, I just let it dry, and I'm just using regular 5-minute epoxy. It just pops off, and that's fine. And then, I just cut the mold just like I said, so that's what it looks like on the inside. And then I'll tape it back up, and then I'll fill this area up with resin, and then I'll put it in my vacuum pot, and that'll pull all the air out. And then when I release the vacuum, all the resin will shoot down in there, and it'll fill all the cracks. There won't be any voids in there. And then, so I'll start that process, and then I'll show you what that looks like, what the finished product looks like. Okay, well, we're almost set now. I got my mold back in. I sprayed it with ease release and let it sit for about 10 minutes. And then I put it back in here. So when you put it back in, you want to make sure that the cut line, which is here, you can't see it on the side. You want to make sure it's back together 100% with very low tension. You can't even see the cut mark on the bottom. That shows you that all the seams that you cut are all lined back up perfectly. And I only put it back inside the pill bottle. Normally I wouldn't do that. I'd just put some light tension with this electrical tape on the outside, but this Umu crap is just so soft that I don't trust it very much. I think it'd deflect and then mess up my parts. So what I'm going to use for resin is this Smooth Cast 325, and it's garbage, but it's readily available at Dick Blick's. What I normally use is this Tash 21, and that stuff is great. It's just like regular plastic. It's super strong, and it's really hard to break. This stuff is okay. I don't like this particular one. They make one called 327, and 327 has a longer pot life. This has a pot life of like 2.5 minutes, which means it hardens super quick. So you really have to be fast. And it also deflects in heat. So if you're in a place like it's in your car, or I don't know, you run under hot water, it'll bend like really, really easy. Whereas this stuff, it takes a lot of heat to get it to start deflecting. You can still deflect it, but it takes a lot of heat. And then but it's really good for if you need parts that are, you know, like if you're replacing some toy parts or something like that, that you really need it strong. I would buy this Task 21. The other one is, I also use the 65D to make like rubber tires and stuff for some mask vehicles, and also some backpacks and things for some of the G.I. Joe men. It doesn't flex 100% enough to get on the G.I. Joe men, but you can add heat to it so it doesn't tear, and then you can get it to bend just a little bit more. But it works great for like rubber tires and stuff. It has a really good property. I also used it for some WWF figures from the 80s and 90s. Some of them had bendable accessories like helmets, hats, and things, and I used it for those. So that is good to know, just if you're trying to do tires or some stuff that needs to be a little bit flexible, that 65D. And also used it for some of my Dwarven Forge stuff, because the Dwarven Forge stuff, you didn't want it too hard. It comes kind of bendy a little bit, and that's very similar to that Smoothcast 65D, but it's a little bit more pricey. It's a little bit thicker, a little bit pastier. This stuff runs like water, and I found in the end, it didn't matter if the Dwarven Forge stuff I was making was like super hard or not, because that stuff, the Task 21 doesn't break anyways, so it's perfectly fine for Dwarven Forge stuff, and it looks great. Let's see if I have any pieces that are made out of it. And this is a piece I just haven't sanded off the bottom of it yet. So I was making some more cavern tiles. I own a lot of Dwarven Forge stuff. Like, I bought about $4,000, probably a little bit more than that. And but you never, I mean, like $500 worth of Dwarven Forge stuff is like one little tiny play mat. I mean, it's ridiculous. The cost is cool, but it's ridiculous the cost. So a lot of the stuff I'll modify or make my own. You know, I need a hole in this or something, I'll cast one and then put a hole in it and then recast it with a bunch of holes. This is just a piece of floor, so I just needed more floor tiles. So there you go. It's just for myself. I don't sell it or anything like that. But this stuff is like super, super strong. It'll never break. I wouldn't say never. I mean, I'm sure somebody could break an anvil. I work with a bunch of them sometimes, but it shouldn't break. So then the next phase that we're going to talk about is the actual getting the resin inside here. Since this stuff cures so fast, I'm not going to be able to film it. Otherwise, I'm going to mess up. So I shook these up really good. I'll put them in 2 separate cups. I'll add coloring to 1 cup. And then when I get ready to mix it, I'll take my mold, put it inside this mason jar here, which is my vacuum chamber. I had to level it, that's what that's about. Then I'll pour the resin inside there, put the cap on, hook it up to my vacuum machine, and then I'll pull a vacuum on it for about a minute. And then my time's running out at that point. Then I'll put it back in the pressure pot and put it for 60 pounds. And then I'll let it wait out. It says it cures fully in 10 minutes, but I'll let it wait a little bit longer than that. On small parts like this, I also put the pressure pot on my skillet. I have like a little griddle. I'll put it on that to get it warm. So actually I'll heat that pot first so that it's nice and warm before I put the vacuum chamber in there, because the cure time's so quick. That'll give it time to warm up, because the chemical reaction depends on heat, how good the chemical reaction is. So the more heat it has, the faster the reaction is, and the more thorough the reaction is. So if it's winter time at your house and you don't heat them, a lot of times they won't fully cure. The other thing is, with the Task 21, it outgasses. After you make your mold and you get your parts out, you can smell the ammonia for a couple of days. So while it's outgassing, I don't generally use the molds, but this stuff says you could use it in 6 hours, so I'm gonna give it a shot. But if you use them too early, a lot of times the outgassing will hinder the curing process of the resin, and your resin will come out kind of slimy instead of fully cured. So just be aware that sometimes if you're using a chemical that's better than this, you'll have to let the mold sit open, you know, airing out for, you know, 3 or 4 days before you can actually use it. Okay, this is the last update. So this is what they look like out of the mold. They're really, really good copies. But there is a problem. They're really flexible. Let's see if I can get it focus. The smooth cast 325 in those thin sections like that, that's probably about a 1/16 of an inch. It just doesn't have any strength in an amount that small. So it has a lot of bend in it, and that's just not going to be able to actuate the wings. So for this case, I would say I'm probably going to have to either spend $45 to have the good stuff shipped to me, in which case I could have just bought a good Buzz Lightyear, or I'll just have to get the washed station and the UV station for my 3D printer and just 3D print out some, because a 3D printer resin is a little bit harder. So you say, well, in the end, what is this good for? Well, this was also the same thing. It's a one-piece mold that I cut out very carefully. So this was from a action figure called Xena of my wife's, and this was porcelain. And she got it, and it showed up from eBay, and this was destroyed. It was in about 10 or 15 pieces. And I very meticulously and very carefully glued them all back together. And then that's what that big thing is on the back. It's not a booger. That's all epoxy. I filled in the back with epoxy to try and hold it all together. Well, I knew that wouldn't work for long term because it's very fragile. So I just casted another one. And this 325 works fine for that. Like I said, these wings would work great if I didn't cheap out and use the 325. But the 325 does still have uses in thicker pieces. Like these dungeon tile pieces. I mean, they're nice and stiff. I don't know if you can see it. I mean, it has great detail, especially if you pressure cast them. If you don't pressure cast them, it can get little air bubbles all over the thing. I'll show you one in just a second. And the other thing is, when you're pouring resin, you don't really have to waste any. If you have a little extra in your cup when you pour your one piece, you just pour it inside a mold, and then when it's done curing, you can just pour some more on top of it the next time, and it just glues right to each other. You can't separate those. But you can see the detail. It's great detail, really strong. I got here like some pieces for some crypts, because I paid like over $600 for 2 sets of crypts from Dwarven Forge, but you barely have enough to make like one crypt encounter with that, and it's awesome stuff. So I'm not complaining, but it's also out of stock, and it's, for what you get, it's really expensive. So I've been, I'm making more so I can paint it up and have more crypts. You have a big crypt encounter, and it's much cheaper. Like, instead of this piece costing, I don't know, $8 or $10 a piece from Dwarven Forge, I can make these pieces probably for about, once I have the mold, probably about 30 cents a piece. Making the mold costs a little more. You'll have a little bit more in it when you make the mold, but there's like some ruins, and there's another little drop where there was some old epoxy in the mold. It doesn't matter. Once it's painted, you'll never see it, and it sticks in there fine. But there's like some little skulls in there and some rubble. I don't know if you can see all that too good. It's really cool stuff. Dwarven Forge is really cool. I highly recommend you support them. But if you don't pressurize, if you don't pressure cast this stuff, look, you can get, like, this was just one that was sitting there, and I was like, oh crap, I got a bunch extra. So I just poured it in this mold and then just let it air dry. You see all them little air bubbles that get trapped in all the undercuts? That doesn't happen if you pressurize it. And it's still a piece you could use, I suppose, if you painted it up. Still a piece you could use. It adds some character to it. It's fine. But I like them when they look a little bit nicer than that. Trying to see. I'll get a piece of, this is what I made with the, what did I say it was called? Task 21. So this is a miniature called an ass bee. That's like really what it's called, an ass bee. But he's got these really tiny little legs on him. But he's super strong. It's not gonna break. That's why I like that Task 21 better. And I may buy some, because I'll still use it for my other things. I have plenty of little projects. My son wants me to make some Halo replacement guns for his Halo figures and some replacement hands for his Halo figures from Halo 3 from when he was a kid. His McFarlane toys are all in pieces. So I may buy some anyways, just so I have some for that. So anyways, that's how it's done. So your mold looks like this. So I can hold it open. The mold looks like that. And then, you know, you can, I suppose you can inject some in. And if you don't have a vacuum pump, you could probably get like a syringe and pump some in there and wait till the bubbles come out this side. Sometimes I'll do that on like my dice and stuff, but like I said, unfortunately, the 325 is just not strong enough that a spring will just bend that. If it didn't need a spring in there, it would probably be perfectly fine. But with the spring, those just aren't going to work. So, hope that helps. Might be useless information to some people, but, you know, like I said, you know, my wife will have a nice Xena action figure again. Or porcelain doll, I should say. All right, hope that helps. Thanks. Bye. Okay, this will be the final update, I think. It'll be a two-parter. So, what I did was I post-cured the ones that I made with Smooth Cast 325. And they strengthened up a little bit after a day of further curing. But when I installed them, they kept breaking this tit off. They'd bend real bad, and when you'd shove the wings in, they'd break the tit off. So they're just not, the mold's great. It looks just like the originals, but the problem is the material's just not strong enough. So I definitely recommend, if you were going to cast these, that you'd use the Task 21. So I did bust out the 3D printer, and there were some free STL files. You can see they don't quite look the exact same, and the backside looks funny. Flip one over. It's not flat, it's kind of rough, so I may have to file these down a little bit. But I was able to cure them and clean them and all that good stuff, and it took me a while to figure out how to use the 3D printer, but we'll see if they work. But yeah, these are 3D printed, and they are not exactly the same as the originals. It's this hook shape here. It's like a 45-degree angle. That may help, because I noticed when I was using these, when I would shove the wings back in, that's when it would break this piece off. So that may help actuate the wings a little better. So we'll see. I'll put it back together and then give it a try. So this is the wing actuators installed, and when I put the resin one in, there was a lot of that tension from that spring started putting a lot of deflection on those. So far so good. Okay, so it seems to work okay. I've tried it several times. The wings come out, and then it's hard to do this one-handed. My hand got in the way of that one. But go back in. There we go. So they go back in. So keep my hand out of the way this time. Really hard to do one-handed, believe it or not. So no wonder it's hard for a toddler. And they pop out just like they're supposed to. So when I got him, I needed this particular one. This is very similar to the one that, it's the same one as what my son had. His laser didn't work. So I got his laser working. That was just the contacts in the arm were all jacked. And
I am Buzz Lightyear.
Just fine
I
now.
come in peace.
His helmet was really damaged. The lens was really damaged, so I used some buffing compound and I cleaned that up, so it's in good order now. So yeah, is it too much work for a $7 flea market toy? I could have just bought a $30 one, but it wouldn't have been the same, and my grandkid would have known the difference. So I think he'll be happy and he'll be able to play with Zerg. And yeah, there we go. He's all fixed now. Okay, this is the final part here. I was doing the Buzz Lightyear wings actuating a few times, and after I installed the 3D printed actuators, and man, they just kept breaking too. So they're stronger, they're not as flexible, but they're brittle, and so they broke into a bunch of pieces, as you can see. The white ones are the originals. They were broken off. There was nothing in there of those. The gray ones are the catastrophic failures of the 3D printed. These are a few resin ones I did, and they're just flexible. They just deflect, and then sometimes they'll break that little tit off the end, which one of the 3D printed ones did as well. But most of them just broke right here at the eye. So what I end up doing was I end up stretching the spring a little bit. So I used some pliers and some side cutters there to unwind the spring a little bit, just so it would still actuate, but it wouldn't have so much tension. So you can see it still works fine, but it doesn't have as much tension on it. So when you take the spring out, the tits kind of face like this, and I bend them together and all the way around 180 degrees, because that's the way they go to make tension. And that way when they wind up the rest of the way, it doesn't have quite as much tension, and they still can spring back and work the toy. So it seems like he's gonna be fine now. Like I said, I polished up his little visor, got his laser working, his voice working.
I am Buzz Lightyear.
And his wings work, so my grandson should be happy. Hope this helps somebody. But originally the thing was, how to make some resin ones, and that is a good tutorial if you're interested in making parts or repair parts or whatever. But I would definitely buy the Task 21 instead of the 325. Smoothcast 325. Smoothcast 325 will work fine for much thicker stuff, but not for stuff this thin, which is about 1/16 of an inch. Other than that, hope that helps.